Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
39-year-old Charles Morgan led a normal and, some might even say, boring life. He worked as the president of his own escrow agency at Statewide Escrow in Tucson, Arizona. He lived a seemingly content life with his wife and 4 daughters. Then, on March 22, 1977, he drove 2 of his daughters to school. He vanished off of the face of the earth. And so would begin the mystery of an unsolved death surrounded by a myriad of weird clues. Pick-related Charles Morgan. When Charles didn't return by evening, his wife Ruth became very worried and she reported him missing. For the next 3 days there was no sign of Charles, and then something very strange happened. At 2 in the morning, 3 days after her husband had disappeared, Ruth was woken up by a banging at the back door. When she went to see who it was, she was surprised to see Charles standing there, apparently in a daze. He had one shoe missing and had a plastic handcuff around one ankle and another set around his hands. When she tried to talk to him, he gestured towards his throat in a panic, so she sat her husband down with a pen and a pad, and the story would get even weirder. Charles scrawled out on the paper that he had been kidnapped and tortured, and that his throat had been sprayed with a mysterious hallucinogenic drug that affected the nervous system. If he were to try and talk, he risked swallowing it and going irrevocably insane or dying. The only way to keep this from happening was to not speak. His frantic wife begged him to go to a hospital, but he flat out refused, saying that they would kill him and the whole family if he did. He told Ruth to move his car to the back so that these sinister, mysterious assailants wouldn't know he had come home. Ruth did as she was told, and for the next few days she took care of Charles, nursing him back to health. During this time, the only thing he would say was that he had worked for them for around 3 years, and that they had taken away his treasury identification. He implied that he was working for the federal government as an agent combating organized crime, although details were murky. When Ruth asked for more information, he told her that the less she knew, the better, and that was that. Charles slowly regained his ability to speak, but he refused to talk to his family about what had happened. At the same time, he became very paranoid, constantly checking outside and growing a thicker beard in order to change his appearance. He took to wearing a bulletproof vest at all times. After some time had passed, he confided in his wife that he was working as an agent for the United States Treasury Department, and that it involved real estate fraud and money laundering being carried out by the mafia, something he had deep knowledge of working in escrow. And in this case he was testifying against 2 major mafia groups, the ominous Ned Warren family and the Joe Bonanno family. He told her that if anything were to happen to him, he would leave a letter behind explaining everything. Shortly after this, Charles Morgan vanished again after dropping his daughters off at school, and this time he would not be coming back. Ruth and the police looked for the letter he had promised, but it never did turn up. And as the investigation seemed to be going cold, Ruth received a mysterious phone call from an unidentified woman who called herself Green Eyes and simply said, "Chuck is all right." Ecclesiastes 12:1-8, before hanging up. 2 days later, on June 18, 1977, Chuck would be found again, but this time he was a corpse, shot dead along a remote dirt road, about 40 miles away from his home. When police arrived at the scene, they found that he had died from a gunshot to the back of his head. He was wearing his bulletproof vest, and he was also armed with a handgun and hunting knife, as well as various other firearms with ample ammunition in his car. Considering the handgun he had been carrying had been fired, it seemed as if he must have committed self-defense, but there were anomalies. First, the gunpowder marks from the shot were found on his left hand even though he had been right-handed. Then, the gun itself had been wiped clean of fingerprints. In fact, the whole car had been totally wiped, despite Morgan not wearing gloves. How would he be able to wipe clean the weapon in scene after shooting himself in the head, and why would he shoot himself in the back of the head, anyway? Also found in the backseat was one of Morgan's teeth wrapped in a white handkerchief, as well as a pair of sunglasses that did not belong to him in the front passenger seat. Other strange clues were a map that he had drawn by hand, which led to the spot where he had died, and a $2 bill clipped to the inside of his underwear. On this bill were found some references to Freemasonry, b. 7 Spanish names, Acevedo, Bejarano, Caro, Duarte, Encinas, Fuentes, and Gradillas, and c. the words Ecclesiastes 12:1-8. The bill also had written on the back the names of the signers of the Declaration of Independence numbered 1 through 7 and a map leading to the towns of Robles Junction and Salacity. What did any of this mean? No one knew. Unbelievably, despite all of this, police were eager to embrace the self-and explanation, and sweep it all away. Pick-related, the bill found on Charles Morgan's body. Not long after the body was found, the woman calling herself Green Eyes made another call, this time directly to police. She claimed that shortly before the death she had met with Charles at a local motel. He had shown her a briefcase stuffed with money, and claimed that it was to buy out a hit that had been put out on him by the mob. According to her, Charles had driven out into that desert with the money to meet with the hitman and buy him off, but instead the hitman had killed him and taken the money. Then, Ruth would have her own odd experience. 2 men claiming to be FBI agents came to her house and tore it apart looking for something they don't seem to have been able to find. In the face of all of this, authorities deemed the death a self-end, stating that there was no hard evidence that the mysterious woman's story was true, and no evidence of foul play. The case was picked up by investigative journalist Don Devereux, who says that he uncovered evidence that Morgan had indeed testified in a secret state investigation against the mafia. But when he contacted the FBI for more information, they claimed they did not even know who Morgan was. Devereux would say of this, "I made a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI, and they claimed never to have heard of M.R. Morgan, despite the fact that they obviously opened an investigation. And despite the fact the FBI interviewed M.R. Morgan's attorney. They were all over this thing like a blanket for a while. But now they've never heard of the guy. He never existed. No card, no file, no nothing." Devereux's investigation would also lead him to a man named Danny Casolaro, who agreed to share secret information on what Morgan had been up to. But before this meeting took place, Casolaro was found dead in a motel room from 12 slashes to the wrist. The police said it was a self-end. Someone also didn't seem to like the reporters snooping around. A man named Doug Johnston, who happened to work right across the street from Devereux, was found shot dead in his car, which just happened to be the same make and model as Devereux's, leading the reporter to suspect that he himself had been the actual target. Here are some of Devereux's thoughts on the case. "I have never seen, in all my years as a journalist, a fellow take himself out in the desert wearing a bulletproof vest and shoot himself in the back of the head. There is a great likelihood that Mr. Morgan was, in fact, doing something with the government. I think somebody blew his cover, and he got killed. He was around the edges of a couple of very large organized crime groups in Arizona at that time. It was very easy to get in over your head, and I suspect that over the years, Mr. Morgan was in that kind of situation. He was a straight businessman that probably got a little too close to the flame. I think the $2 bill provided the basis for some kind of a code. What seemed to be missing, however, was the document that the $2 bill would unlock. If he was quietly providing assistance to the U.S. government and monitoring the activities of one or more major organized crime families, then he wasn't a villain. He was a good guy. And they need to know that. What happened to Charles Morgan? What is the meaning of all of the clues surrounding his death? Who was Green Eyes and what part did she have to play? Was Morgan killed by sinister forces, and if so, why? Why did the FBI deny any knowledge of this case, and was someone out to get the one who was investigating it all? What was the meaning of the note on that $2 bill? It is a bafflingly strange case, permeated by dark conspiracies and cover-ups, and we may never know for sure. In the meantime, it is officially listed as a self-end.
Here's a cool Florida story. It's historical. When the Spanish arrived in Florida, they wiped out an Indian tribe, but they weren't able to kill the chief because he was a gigantic fit/dude. Finding himself without a tribe to lead, the chief traveled deep into the Florida swamp like fucking Rambo with a plan to wage guerrilla warfare on the Spanish. Over many years, people began to disappear there, probably murdered by the chief. Spanish soldiers exploring the swamp disappeared, never to be seen again. Pirates who tried to escape justice by hiding in the swamp disappeared without a trace. A manager of the Spalding trading post also vanished there. In 1838 and 1863, U.S. disappeared there. The last documented disappearance was in 1904, a young surveyor failed to return from the area. Obviously this is way too long for one man to hide out there and kill all of these people, but some say the chief refused to die. He hides out there to this day, revenge for his tribe on anyone who travels through his swamp. The Spanish also massacred the French settlers when they arrived. These guys were brutal. They took a French Huguenot monk, a kind of Protestant monk, and tied him to a tree and tortured the poor guy until he died. Now, in several online directories of haunted places, there are references made to a glowing figure who appears on a densely wooded street called Gobbler Road. Pick related. Oh, and there's also the Skunk Ape. Basically, a Bigfoot that smells like shit. Some sightings reported in the Daily Sun. November, 1977. Reverend S. L. Wutley, pastor of the Fort McCoy Baptist Church, aged 67, was in the Ocala National Forest one day. He recalls his encounter. It was standing upright, in the middle of some palmetto bushes. That sapsucker was at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. It had dark, lighter than black hair on its head and chest, not much on its arms, and none on its face. It had kind of a flat face, a flat nose, its eyes were sunk in its sockets. Wutley said he quickly went back to his truck to get an axe because me and that creature was going to mix it up, but by the time he returned from the truck the creature had disappeared. He made sure to add that he hasn't had a drink in 40 years. Also, in 1986, a man camping near Astor reported that at 3 a.m. he smelled something similar to a skunk, and sighted a large creature walking on 2 legs. In the morning, he found his coolers ransacked. In 1974, a man camping in the same area sighted a large bipedal creature at about 10 p.m. In 1996, a woman and her father were driving down a road in the forest when they sighted a hairy bipedal creature about 5 to 6 feet tall. Also, not sure if anyone here has heard of Glimmer People? But I've seen a few stories of them. They're kind of like shimmering entities that resemble the predator alien when it's using its cloaking ability. Pick related. Here's one guy talking about it. He was a University of Florida student who was out hiking with his dog, Toby, on the Gainesville-Hawthorne State Trail. It was a weekday around 11 a.m., so there were very few people, just me and Toby. All of a sudden Toby froze. He just stood there with his ears perked up, tail sticking straight out. He was staring into the trees like he saw something. So, I asked him, "What do you see, Toby?" "What is it, boy?" At this point Toby's demeanor started to change. He began to whimper and started pulling on the leash like he wanted out of there. I continued to look into the trees trying to spot whatever was scaring him, and that's when I saw it. It's very hard to describe, but this thing looked translucent, but not quite. It was in the shape of a human, but it was see-through. The thing that stood out the most was the glowing yellow eyes. That was the only thing that wasn't clear. As crazy as it sounds, this thing looked like the alien in the Predator movies. It was standing on a large tree branch hanging on by its right arm and was looking directly at me and Toby. It slowly began to crouch down and tried to hide behind the trunk of the tree. Like it noticed us noticing him. I don't know why I say him. I absolutely have no idea the sex of this strange creature. I was mesmerized by this thing. I was just staring at it, trying to figure out what it was. I didn't want to take my eyes off of it in fear that I might lose sight of it. This thing was so damn camouflaged. If I looked away, I might not be able to find it again. Then it moved. It swung through the trees effortlessly and made almost no sound. It would move a few trees away and then freeze, looking back at us. I guess it was trying to determine if we were watching it or not. I got the feeling this thing did not want to be seen. It would move, then freeze, crouch down and put itself between us and the tree it was in. It would sit there for a few minutes and then move again. I wanted to follow it, but everything in my body said not to. So, I just watched it and it eventually disappeared into the forest. Toby and I jogged back to the car and I never told anyone about what we saw. To this day I don't know what I witnessed. Was it an alien or something? I don't know. I was scared the day it happened, but at the same time I was excited to see something like that. Toby and I went back there numerous times and I'm not going to lie, I hoped to see it again, but I never did. I thought that I was the only one who had this type of encounter until I heard people talking about the Glimmer Man. Well, I saw it, and now I tell anyone who will listen. Of course, some people think I'm crazy, but I don't care.
I got a story from when I was about 14-15-ish. My dad has been complaining that my brothers, friends, and I have been leaning on the back banister that separates our back porch and a grassy field. It's missing a few pieces of wood by now and a bit shaky. So, I got home late from soccer practice, parents were working so no ride. Got home around 8-9 p.m, brothers aren't home, great, my time to play some Final Fantasy. As I go turn on the PS1, I start hearing some loud racket or banging from the porch. I get up to see what's going on, maybe my brother's messing with me. Nah, I saw some hairy looking thing, probably had some inches on me. So, I'm confused and decided to go dashing outside my front door to go cough what. By the time I reach the back of my house it's already running across the field. So, I take chase, hauling ass across this field with my cleats on. I reach the retention pond that's dried up and connected to the field and a forest. I get about a quarter of the way across the retention pond and I see that the hairy creature had made it to the edge of the forest. I'm about halfway across the retention pond now and still looking at the creature. Then something like instinct clicked in me. Why was it just staring back at me and not going deeper into the woods? It seemed like it was just waiting for me to get closer. At that point I decided to book it all the way back home. This was all in Georgia at the time, outskirts of Atlanta. I've got some other stories that have happened to me in my life if you all want to hear them.
I lived in Atlanta and had a similar experience, though it was just a homeless guy wearing dog pelts for warmth. I was hiking at the Monadnock and he came up and started speaking weird, like whispering. I thought his outfit was weird and then saw the dog heads. I told him to fuck off and pulled my gun. He ran off.
This one is bizarre. Anon journeys to the Amazon and experiences a fucking weird abduction. It's a fun read if you like aliens and monsters. Okay, a little backstory. I am a reptile enthusiast, and until recently I bred, sold, and collected large pythons. In 2015 I joined a reptile expedition through the Amazon jungle led by some of the world's top herpetologists, reptile experts. It was a dream come true for me, and long story short, I went and had a blast. Some of the people I met there are still my closest friends to this day. I missed the expedition the following year, and I promised myself I wouldn't miss the next one. So 2017 comes around. I see the advertisement for the trip on Facebook and boom, my credit card comes out and I book a flight. The trek would start and end in a city in Peru called Iquitos, which you could only reach by boat or plane. There were 3 lodges we would be staying at on our way, with 1 night planned at the first lodge, 2 nights at the second, and 2 nights at the third. So the day I arrive at Iquitos I get acquainted with everybody and check into my room. It was only meant to function as a place to sleep. since the point of the trip was to spend the whole day enjoying the wilderness of the Amazon. The layout of the rooms and the lodge is extremely important to the story, so let me explain it briefly. The rooms were all the same, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, and they were all arranged in a row. There were 13 total, just a long lodge of single rooms. No ceilings, just a big canopy that covered all of the rooms. The back wall near the head of the bed was actually only a half wall with a curtain that covered the rest of the way up. Also, there were these stairs that came up out of the jungle right up to the center of the lodge. Anyway, we mostly did our own exploring during the day, and since it was our first day, a bunch of people stayed out really late exploring. They didn't get back till 5 a.m. But by the end of the second night, even those of us that hadn't been out so late the previous day were pretty tired. I think we called it quits around 2 a.m. Now here is where shit starts to get weird. I don't know if this first thing has anything to do with what happened next, but as I was settling into bed, there was a persistent knock on the door to my room. And the person outside was calling me by my nickname. Nobody there knew me by that name, not even the guy leading the trip, who was a friend of mine. Since it was late and I didn't really want to get out of bed, I pretended to be asleep, ignoring the knocking until it went away. As I'm lying there, I realize that the curtain behind me on the half wall is kind of open. I get up to close it, but take a moment to open it a bit and look out at the jungle outside. As I'm looking, I suddenly get a feeling. I don't know if it was intuition or what, but it was like something telling me, shut up, close the curtain, and get in bed. I don't know where that feeling came from, but I did just that. And within 5 minutes I hear a mechanical beeping nearby. 3 beeps with an echo. Beep, beep. Beep, beep. Beep, beep. Right after that, I began to hear grunting. At first I thought it was a really big animal, but as I listened I realized I could make out at least 3 grunting to each other. Then one of them let out a reptilian-sounding hiss. The jungle is completely silent except for the sounds of these creatures. I'm thinking that there is no way anyone would be able to sleep through this. I don't really have a very good reference of time, but after maybe 30 minutes of listening to these things walk around outside, I hear a strange sound. Kinda like an R2-D2 type of sound, like a computer. But I hear that sound and it zooms right over my room, and I see that it's coming from some type of orb. It zooms all the way to the first room at the end of the lodge. I was in the 12th room at the opposite end. So this thing goes over room 1, and I see that it shined a light straight down into the room, like it was signaling that room. At that point the whole lodge began to shake, and I heard something hurrying up the stairs, the ones that lead up from the jungle to the lodge. Whatever it is, it sounds like it jumps over the wall into the room 1. Now I'm freaked out. I start thinking in my head, how is this all going to turn out? I'm imagining the Channel 4 news report of a group of expeditioners going missing in the Amazon. I don't really know how much time passed. Maybe 10 minutes. Then the sound and the orb move over room 2, and I hear the same thing as before. Something jumps into room 2. At this point, I start thinking about my mom, and what she's going to think if I die in the Amazon. I get out my notepad as quietly as I can and I write her a letter saying that something is outside of the rooms, but I'm going to stay inside. And that if I end up going missing it's because they came and took me. Anyways, this sequence happens maybe 4 or 5 times. When it gets to room 6 this time the thing jumps in the room, and I don't know what caused it but this thing gave a loud shriek. I can only imagine what is going on and what this thing looks like. I am sitting in my room in complete darkness, complete silence, with no defense, scared out of my mind. It's eventually going to get to my room. The orb gets to the room right next to mine and shines its light. I hear the thing jump the wall into the room, and after a minute I hear my neighbor in her sleep let out a quicker sound. Then, almost as if she were made to feel comfortable or something, she sighs, "Ooh," and that's all I heard. I know I'm next, and I feel completely helpless against whatever this thing is. The same way that earlier I had felt that shut up and get in bed feeling, I could feel now that it would be a bad idea to scream and make my non-cooperation known, so I stayed silent. The orb went over my room, but did not signal. It must have seen that I was not asleep and moved past me to the last room. Then suddenly, the guy that prepares our breakfast and stuff for the lodge turns on the generators so he could make breakfast. Right when he does this, I hear the same beeps as I did at the beginning of the experience, and all of the beings on. Then, everyone starts to wake up at the same exact time. Now I'm wondering, when I go outside, are some of the people in the group going to be missing? Dead. Zombified. So I step outside and go into the breakfast room, and most everyone is already in there and they're just acting normal. Nobody else even realized anything had happened. I asked them all and every single person said they slept the whole night through. In fact, out of everyone there, not one person got up to drink water. Not one person got up to go to the bathroom. Not one person snored. The next night I heard people doing all of those things. The only thing I can think is that they had some sort of trance put on them to keep them asleep, and I somehow wasn't affected. Only one woman there said she woke up in the middle of the night and felt very dazed. She told me that she looked at their clock and it was 3 a.m. but that it looked like broad daylight through the curtain. Only she agreed that something strange took place.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.